The midnight bus, a ride to the afterlife. Asterisk, it was past midnight when the bus rumbled down the desolate stretch of road, its headlights barely cutting through the thick mist that clung to the ground. The streets were empty, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The only sound was the steady hum of the bus's engine and the soft creak of the doors as they slid open. The midnight bus had always been a curious thing. It wasn't part of any regular route, and few people ever saw it on the road. The locals, however, had long whispered about it, about the eerie silence that surrounded it, about the mysterious passenger who boarded at the same time every night. Tonight was no different. As the bus approached the abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of town. The driver, a grizzled man named Gus, peered into the fog, his tired eyes searching the road. He had been driving this route for over 20 years, but even he couldn't deny the oddness of it. Every night, without fail, the same passenger would board when the bus passed the cemetery. This passenger never had a face, at least not one. Gus could remember. They were always cloaked in shadows, their features hidden beneath the hood of a tattered dark coat. No one ever spoke to them, no one dared. It was as if the passenger wasn't even really there, but somehow they always managed to be on the bus by the time it rolled past the gates of the cemetery. Gus tried to ignore it. He didn't want to know, didn't want to think too deeply about what it meant. But tonight, something felt different. The bus slowed as it neared the cemetery. The gates loomed like a pair of ancient sentinels, their iron bars twisted and rusted. The ground around them overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. The mist thickened, swirling in front of the headlights as if trying to hide something. That's when Gus saw a figure standing just inside the gates, waiting. The figure was still, as though made of stone. Gus's breath caught in his throat. As the bus approached, he glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, then back at the road. He was certain it wasn't there when he had passed by moments earlier. The figure began to move, gliding forward with an unsettling grace, never making a sound. It reached the bus stop just as the vehicle slowed to a stop. The doors hissed open. Gus's heart raced. He tried to force his gaze forward, but it was like a magnetic pull. Drawing his eyes back to the figure that now stood at the open door. The figure stepped onto the bus, silent and motionless. Gus didn't see their face, only the shadowed outline of a hood that seemed to swallow the light. The air grew colder, and for a moment, Gus thought he saw a faint, otherworldly glow emanating from beneath the hood. But when he blinked, it was gone. Gus quickly pressed the button to close the doors. The bus lurched forward again, its wheels grinding on the road, but the figure remained standing, not sitting like the others. It was as if they were waiting, watching, waiting for something that never came. The ride was always the same, silent. The other passengers, if there were any, never spoke to each other, and if anyone had ever seen the figure before, they didn't acknowledge it. Everyone sat stiffly, as if they were afraid to disturb the strange, unspoken ritual. Tonight, however, something different lingered in the air, a thickening tension that Gus couldn't shake. He kept glancing at the figure in the mirror, but every time he did, they were still there, unmoving, as if frozen in time. He glanced at the clock. Only a few minutes had passed since the figure boarded, but it felt like an eternity. Gus couldn't help it any longer. His curiosity got the best of him. He turned in his seat, looking at the figure. "Where are you headed?" Gus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond. Gus's heart skipped a beat. He cleared his throat and tried again. "You've been riding this bus for years, but you never get off." "Where do?" "You go after?" No answer. The figure simply stood, unblinking, their head tilted slightly toward the window. Gus swallowed hard. His instincts told him to keep his mouth shut, to focus on the road, but something else, something dark and persistent, urged him to ask, to know more. His breath fogged up the glass as he looked out the front window, just in time to see the cemetery disappearing behind them. Then a strange, chilling sound echoed in the distance. It wasn't the usual creaking of the bus or the sound of wind. This was something else, something deeper. Gus's hand froze over the steering wheel, the bus lurching as it hit a bump in the road. The sound grew louder, a low, mournful wail that seemed to come from the very ground beneath them. And then, for the first time, the figure spoke. "I'm not going anywhere." The voice was cold, hollow, and yet somehow familiar. Gus froze, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" The figure turned slowly, their face still hidden beneath the hood, and as they did, the air grew even colder. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the bus. "There's nowhere left for me to go," the voice whispered. "I'm already where I need to be." Suddenly, the bus jerked forward, picking up speed. Gus slammed his foot on the brake, but the bus wouldn't stop. The fog thickened, swirling around the bus, and the mournful wail grew louder, filling the air with an oppressive weight. The bus was no longer on the road. It was somewhere else, somewhere dark. And the cemetery gates loomed once again, but now they were different, far older, far more ancient. The figure's voice cut through the chaos. "This is where the journey ends, Gus." Gus's eyes widened. He could barely see the figure now, only a vague outline in the mist. The doors opened once again, but this time it wasn't a stop. It was an invitation. The doors closed behind him, and the bus disappeared into the night, the eerie sound of the mournful wail fading into silence. The midnight bus had made its final journey, and its passenger was no longer just a passenger. It was something else now. Something beyond the living. Something waiting. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a like, share, and comment, as it's really helped the channel grow.